Hi, I'm Dave Efforts, Operations Manager with We Energies. I'd like to take a bit of your time today to discuss some work zone safety tips and best practices that you can put into play when operating around utilities. Keep in mind, as a representative of We Energies, some of our standards, or things I may say, are our own internal procedures. Always check with the host utility of where you're working. So come on, let's get started. The first thing we'd like to discuss today is around electrical safety. And what I hope to do is truly drive it directly into the work zones that each and every one of you work around every day. Try to break it down as simple as possible and go through just some general characteristics that you run into out in the field. To do that, I did bring along my demo unit, and we'll get into this a little bit later. First, let me just talk some of the stuff that you see each and every day on your job sites. Keep in mind that our electrical system throughout the state of Wisconsin, you will be operating around both overhead and underground buried utilities. So a lot of times the question would be asked, well, okay, that's nice, but what are in those utilities and what's running in all of these lines that I see? Out at any point in time, whether it's overhead or underground, you'd be operating around voltages that can range from 120 volts, which is your normal distribution to a residential house, all the way up into and over 300,000 volts on some of the really large lattice structured transmission lines. You work around that every single day. And keep in mind, at the house level, what I like to always tell people is that we operate around electricity all day long, and it's completely safe. You know, today when I woke up, although I didn't use a curling iron or a hair dryer, I was around electricity since when my alarm clock went off, and I'm still here speaking with you right this minute. So now let's take a look into the actual field itself. I brought my setup with us, and I also brought my high voltage rubber gloves to make sure that I stay safe. We want to talk a little bit about electricity and a path to ground, and then how does that affect you on your work site. The first thing we like to show is, what does electricity look like when it goes to ground? First and foremost, we'll pull a small arc so you can see the electricity. And then I brought my helper along to actually show path to ground. When he lights up, this is what happens when electricity flows to a path to ground. Why is that important? Well, if that occurs, electricity flowing through the human body is usually what's going to kill you in those instances. So, as you see, I brought along a crane. A lot of times we all operate in and around cranes. The thing that we often get asked in the utility industry is, all right, the crane gets energized. The operator of the crane is normally sitting up on the crane. And this gets into what we'll call a bird on the wire theory. And you'll have to follow me for a second on why that makes sense. But if you think about it, each and every day, behind your house or out right now in the work zones that you're at, you'll see birds sitting out on wires. They land on our primary wires and our voltages, and they fly right away and they're perfectly safe. Why is that? I've been asked that all the way from kindergartners on up when I do safety presentations. Very simple to explain. The bird on a wire theory is nothing more than, as you can see, the crane's load is actually touching the primary wire. What happens when I actually energize this is nothing. You notice nobody lights up. He's perfectly safe. Why is that? It's because the electricity is flowing essentially around the person that's operating. And again, the question you may ask, and you're sitting there in your seats right now, is wondering, well, why is that important? Well, each and every day, when we run our cranes, or our backhoes, or our high hose, a lot of times we're lifting loads. The person actually running the load is not actually in danger when it goes into the power lines, unless, of course, the equipment catches on fire. One of the main keys, though, is we have operators. A lot of times these operators may not know exactly what they're working around. They may be newer to the site. They've just been brought in as an apprenticeship, and their knowledge level is extremely low. And why does that concern us? Well, you're going to be running the crane, or somebody else, usually pretty knowledgeable, is running the high hoe. You're moving equipment, and it becomes energized. What happens in that situation? Let's test it. As you can see, it went straight to ground through the person standing on the ground. And again, one of the big reasons why this is such a concern is the operator on the ground is at an immediate grounded 100% ground potential. Electricity will flow directly through that person, no questions asked. That person is most likely going to either die or have some very severe injuries that we don't really want to talk about today. Now I'd like to transition into another job scene that hopefully most people in this room are very familiar with. We took a little bit of time to talk about operating around overhead power lines. Now let's focus on the underground system. And when I say the underground system, I'm including all utilities in that underground system. Before we actually get into a demonstration, let's take a minute to touch on the state statutes. Keep in mind, state statutes actually dictate that no power digging equipment can be used within 18 inches of all utility marks. Now, a caveat is that includes also the size of the utility, not just the mark on the ground. We at We Energies, we do take that one step farther. And on our property, and any contractor working for us, we extend that out to 24 inches. So that means no power digging equipment within 24 inches of a buried facility marking. Now, let's focus our attention back to the backhoe and digging, something that everyone in the room is very familiar with. How quickly does something go wrong? Well, when you're operating around buried facilities and you dig into a power line, it's as fast as it happened on the overhead system. A few last tips before we move into gas safety, specifically on the transmission side. The underground buried transmission system actually operates within an oil-filled pipeline. While the electricity within that pipeline is dangerous, just damaging the outside casing can be extremely expensive to fix. Not to mention, most people don't like being without power. Another spot on the transmission side is that the heights vary due to the weather and temperature and the sagging that can happen on the electric wires on those transmission systems. And the last thing, on job sites, just to keep in mind, something that is overlooked a lot, the piling of soils in, around, and over utilities can cause damage or set you up for an accident. And what I mean by that is that any piling underneath will raise the equipment height that you may be operating within, and then that sagging and other things that can occur can bring that closer to your equipment. The last one is when you pile it over future excavations, you may actually be hurting yourself by covering up the digger's marks that you will be depending on. Now, let's move into some gas safety. Now let's take a few minutes and take a look at gas safety. A few general principles to keep in mind when operating around gas utilities. One, keep in mind gas is lighter than air. What does that actually mean on our construction sites? That means should we strike a gas main or have a leak, it has the potential to migrate down other utilities or excavations and enter into someone's home or business. And at that point in time, it can become extremely dangerous. Another thing to keep in mind is that gas is ignitable at 900 degrees Fahrenheit. Taking that again back into our field, ignition sources out on the job site can be anything from the machinery you're operating to a simple cell phone. Finally, what should you do should you hit a gas main? A few very simple steps. First and foremost, if you can, shut the equipment off. Immediately evacuate the area and anyone else that's within the area, and then call 911. Now, let's actually take a look at a simulation of what gas exploding really looks like. Now that we discussed gas and electric safety, I'd like to touch on a few best practices that can be put into play at all job sites. It starts at the beginning in the preparation phase. Phone calls to Digger's Hotline, verifying that those ticket numbers are accurate, and then overlaying those ticket numbers and the areas that you have located with your construction prints is pivotal into a successful job. One other step that I would like to remind everybody of is the communication required. That communication doesn't just stop with your own company. On all of our job sites, there are many, many construction employees and utilities or firms. By communicating to all of them, we will help all of us be successful. So please, don't forget the preparation and planning phase of all of your jobs. Now into scene, survey, and arriving on scene. A few things to touch on, and I would like to stress these, that if you don't remember anything else, keep a few of these in mind. They may save a life someday. When you get to a job scene, take a deep breath and take the 10 seconds to actually do a scene survey. Look around. You've been on job sites longer than most of the people on the job. You know your jobs. Things will pop out at you that are immediate hazards. It's what we like to call the light bulb effect. By doing that again, you may save a life. Give it a try. And keep in mind that a watchdog from any of the host utilities across the state of Wisconsin may contact you when a representative is required to watch over high-pressure lines. That makes it extremely important that the field contact information you provide is accurate. To wrap things up, All of the safety principles and best practices that we discussed today can be put into play on every job site or construction site that is out there. Please, put them into use after you leave today. I'd like to thank you for attending today's meeting, and keep in mind what I like to say, safety means tomorrow.